During the 1920s, Americans were seeking to enjoy the newfound peace that was established after World War I. They were making more money, spending more money, and having more fun. As a result, this decade of relative opulence came to be known as the Roaring Twenties. A decade unlike any other, the Roaring Twenties were marked by the arrival of jazz music, the phenomenon known as the Harlem Renaissance, the growing independence of women as reflected in the fashion of the day, and the prohibition of alcohol, which led to a seedy underworld of bootlegging, organized crime, and speakeasies. All of these features helped to create the backdrop for F. Scott Fitzgerald's 1925 novel, The Great Gatsby. The jazz age of the Roaring Twenties put the spotlight on a new sound, hard-edged, passionate, and distinctly urban. The jazz musician character appealed to many young people hoping to escape the drudgery of rural America. Chicago and New York became the hotbeds of this new music. Jazz quartets are forming all over the country as young boys gather to listen to new records or wind up Victrolas. Two of the most famous jazz musicians of the time were Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong. Ellington, born Edward Kennedy Ellington in 1899, spent much of his career in New York City, a career which spanned over 50 years. Duke liked to call his music American music rather than jazz, claiming that it extended beyond any single genre. Louis Armstrong, nicknamed Satchmo, was originally from New Orleans. An innovative trumpet player and cornet player, Armstrong was a founding father of the jazz age, known as much for his gravelly singing voice as for his mastery of the instruments. Armstrong was one of the first truly popular African-American entertainers, whose skin color was secondary to his talent, and he helped to pave the way for the Harlem Renaissance. In addition to Ellington and Armstrong, other African Americans, such as writers and poets like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, also flourished. At the forefront of this movement was W.E.B. Du Bois, a black historian and Harvard scholar who helped to found the NAACP. Because this rebirth of African American culture took place largely in Harlem, New York City, the period became known as the Harlem Renaissance. During the 1920s, a new woman was born. She smoked, drank, danced, and voted. She cut her hair, wore makeup, and went to parties. She was giddy and took risks. She was a flapper. The term flapper first appeared in Great Britain after World War I. It was there used to describe young girls, still somewhat awkward in movement, who had not yet entered womanhood. Authors like F. Scott Fitzgerald first introduced the term to the U.S., half reflecting and half creating the image and style of the flapper. Fitzgerald described the flapper as lovely, expensive, and about 19. Author H.L. Mencken said a flapper was a somewhat foolish girl, full of wild surmises and inclined to revolt against the precepts and admonitions of her elders. Flappers had both an image and an attitude. It was this attitude, in part, that led to the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which gave women in the United States the right to vote. Led by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the amendment was first introduced in 1878. However, it would take 41 years and a profound shift in thinking before Congress would submit the amendment to the states for ratification. Long after black men, women were finally given the right to vote on August 18, 1920. Probably the most unique aspect of the Roaring Twenties was the nationwide ban on alcohol. Following World War I, Americans spent much of their free time drinking alcoholic beverages, but in 1919, the 18th Amendment, which called for prohibition, was ratified. Prohibition made it illegal to sell or produce alcoholic beverages. Prohibition had quite an effect on American life in the 1920s. People who supported the prohibition hoped it would make society become more moral. However, Prohibition seemed to have the opposite effect. Because it was illegal to drink alcohol, many people found it to be exciting and glamorous, and illegal clubs sprang up where people could go and socialize and drink. The term bootleg comes from the practice of hiding flasks of illegal alcohol inside the boot or pant leg in order to conceal it from authorities. During the 1920s, many people manufactured their own alcohol for personal use. Of greater concern, however, was the wide-scale manufacture of alcohol, much of it dangerously low in quality, for sale to the general public. Much of the illegal grain alcohol was imported from Canada, but most of it was produced in the United States, in well-hidden distilleries and dimly lit warehouses. The lack of regulation of bootlegging alcohol, along with the frequent protection of the practice from corrupt officials, made it difficult to properly police. As a result, the practice of bootlegging became popular in cities like Chicago and New York. Secret clubs, called speakeasies, became very popular in these locations, where a secret door, a code word, and a wink would allow drinkers to gain access to some of the liveliest parties hidden from the law. The word speakeasy derives from the careful whispers of code words by patrons in order to gain entrance. Of course, the poor regulation of bootlegging and speakeasies opened the door for a dramatic rise in organized crime. Gangsters like Al Capone ruled the world of illegal bootlegging from Chicago to the West Coast. In New York City, corrupt officials made it possible to sell large quantities of alcohol and to operate speakeasies in a seedy underworld of crime and violence. Novels like The Great Gatsby and films like The Untouchables have dramatized the bootlegging industry and the shady characters who made it go. The development of characters such as Fitzgerald's Meyer Wolfsheim, a gangster loosely based on the real-life gambler Arnold Rothstein, helped to fix the 1919 World Series, in which the Chicago White Sox lost on purpose to the Cincinnati Reds. In the novel, Wolfsheim's involvement with Jay Gatsby serves as a clue that Gatsby may be involved in illegal activity of his own. Written in 1925 and set in 1922, F. Scott Fitzgerald's novel is considered the consummate novel about the Roaring Twenties. Fraught with opulence and wealth, mystery and intrigue, crime and revenge, the novel includes characters such as the gangster Wolfsheim, as well as Jordan Baker, the beautiful young golf pro who represents the independent woman, the piano-playing boarder Klipspringer, whose jazzy tunes resonate throughout Gatsby's mansion, and Gatsby himself, a wealthy young entrepreneur from West Egg, whose rise to the successful life of millionaire and subsequent fall into despair are reflective of the nation's ascent to prosperity before the stock market crash and ensuing Great Depression of the 1930s.